Purple Monkey Theater Company. We are awesome. Let us show you just how awesome we are. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the G-Men podcast.
It is indeed just what you've been looking for, guys.
We're just here to this next session. We're just going to talk stuff that's not always funny, but weirdly enough are called comic books.
Okay. And we're going to be looking at comic books, in relation to sort of racial awareness. Why is it that sort of these superheroes are, maybe white rather than black, because it is an issue that the Afro-Caribbean community want to sort of, talk about.
And, as a comic book fan and a movie fan, I quite like the actor Donald Glover.
Okay.
From Community. And there's big talk about him possibly being the next Spider-Man.
Okay.
And he happens to be black.
He happens to be black. Okay.
Yeah.
Now that's something that, the black community can sort of rejoice about, because they don't often see, black main characters on television. You are starting to see, signs of, main, black actors. If you look at a series like Luther, for instance, you're starting to see signs of, black actors, coming through as the main, the protagonist, for instance.
Well, Idris Elba, a perfect example. The man that should be the next James Bond after Daniel Craig, and he happens to be black.
Okay, well, it is debatable. And a lot of people in the white community are not, sort of optimistic about that idea, for one. And that's because, according to the books that were written, I'm not sure of the, according to the books, James Bond originally was white, and that's due to his background, and his parents were aristocrats. Is that right? He was coming from
Navy officers and stuff like that. Yeah,
exactly. So, and that was predominantly white, wasn't it? So to have that, shift to a black character, that would be insane for most.
For most people, yeah.
Exactly.
I polled a whole bunch of people about the Donald Glover thing.
Okay.
80% of them could care less, whether Spider-Man is black or not. The 20% that do care,
okay,
are all objecting on the fact that he's quote unquote always been white in the past.
Exactly.
Despite obviously the background of the character not requiring that sort of racial motivation.
Yeah. You say racial motivation, but we also need to understand the target audience as well. Are they going to be mostly white? Is it going to be a mixture of black and white, But the fact is that most of them will be white. I don't watch Community myself, and a lot of people who do watch Community will be white. I think it just comes down to the directors themselves. The directors, the producers behind Community, they're mostly white, and they will therefore give out material that is more appealing to white people. I know it is a really biased way to look at it, but some of it might be quite.
Yeah, unfortunately, we do live in a biased world still, don't we?
Exactly.
But don't you think it's our job as artists to try to perhaps change those perceptions in ways that we can? For instance, if they didn't bother telling anybody that Spider-Man was going to be in Captain America: Civil War, and they do the famous scene from the comic books where Spider-Man unmasks and reveals his secret identity. So the entire time you see Spider-Man, you see Spider-Man.
Okay.
And it's not until that pivotal scene, about 3/4 of the way through the film, he unmasks, and there's Donald Glover. Are people gonna get up and walk out of the cinema? Or are they just gonna turn to the internet and complain like little bitches?
They will most likely turn to the internet and complain like little bitches. It is very difficult, But I like your point about us as artists sort of bringing people together as a community to sort of really give out material that is appealing to both black, white, or Asian, rather than segregating everything, Because in theatre, I was looking into the newspapers today. I was looking into the newspapers recently, and there was an article in there about how theatre. A lot of audiences in the theatre are mostly white, okay? And that's because people in they might call it the ghetto in America, they might call it the suburb here in the UK, but a lot of people don't have time for theatre. They don't know what it is. What is a theatre? Is it something that is out there for them,
I think a lot of the issue, and it's interesting that you bring that up, not me, given the module that we're recording this podcast for, because it's really meant to be about bringing quote unquote theater to the populace, and to communities that need that theatrical involvement.
All right.
Like street theater.
Okay.
Everybody's seen the modern day version of it, but back in the day, street theater was a way to protest. It was protest theater. It was poor people in the streets during festivals, celebrating God or gods, burning kings and queens in effigy, stuff like that, as a way of protest. And then theater moved into quote unquote theater spaces, and less poor people could attend.
Exactly.
So I think the idea needs to be really to take those things that we would normally do in a theater space for 35 quid a pop, and start performing them in the streets.
In the streets.
Where people don't pay, or they give donations or whatever, because that way they experience the theater.
Exactly.
How many more little black kids, perhaps, speaking as a very old white person, guys, I have to admit, but how many more of them would get interested in the Marvel Universe if Spider-Man was black?
A lot more. That would make a huge difference. And your point as well sort of relates into a community theatre. That was all that was what Augusto Boal was all about. And he was a politician himself, and he wanted to make theatre that would address issues within the community, but also change the world, if that makes sense. It would. His work was mainly to sort of challenge people's views and ideas about their society. And that's what community theatre is all about. Through community theatre we can maybe sort of address these kind of issues, but in a comical way, so that people can be engaged. Sort of ask questions such as, what if Spider-Man was black? What if Peter Parker was black? Or maybe and so forth. But we are getting signs of black superheroes coming through in the future. If you've heard, Black Panther, for instance, is coming soon.
That's a guy that definitely can't be recast with a white person, even if you wanted to.
Yeah.
You can't be the king of an African nation and be a white guy.
Exactly.
Thank God.
But yeah, community theatre. I think community theatre is the way, perhaps, to sort of address those kind of racial, social, political issues.
Well, yeah. You look at. Slightly off tangent, but you look at something like Big Brother.
Exactly. Yes.
A TV show that I now despise, but watched the first season religiously.
Okay.
Because the first season is really a social experiment.
Exactly.
And it's only becomes a performance because of editing and stuff like that. But you watch successive series of that show, and you see where it's become more about, creating trauma.
Exactly.
Like intentionally putting people in there.
Yes.
That aren't going to mix well because you'll get ratings, as opposed to actually caring how people react genuinely.
Yes.
With each other. You look at back to the comic book thing. One of the things I find kind of amazing is Captain America, who I'm on record as saying is my favorite superhero of all time. You look at this guy, and you go, "Well, why couldn't he have been black?" But it's like you said, if the Black Panther has to be black because he's the king of, an African nation. Yes. Captain America in the 30s, early 40s when he was created, there weren't very many black soldiers in the first place.
Exactly.
And those that did exist were all in all black regiments.
Yes.
And stuff like that. What I find interesting about Captain America, though, is when you veer away from race and you go into like religion and other cultural things, you have a 6'6", blonde, blue-eyed, basically the perfect Aryan.
Yeah.
And he's been created by Jewish creators to fight against the Nazis.
Okay.
And I just kind of wonder, did they consciously make him an Aryan, or was that kind of just an accident? Were they trying to subvert the art form and say something? Or, or was it a coincidence? So, like, if you cast Donald Glover because he's a great actor,
okay,
do you come across as casting him just because he's black? Or do people realize you've cast him because he's a great actor?
All right.
You know, the same thing with Idris.
Yeah.
You know, if people find out about a quote unquote black James Bond, do they think Idris gets cast because he's black and they want to be socially correct?
Correct.
Or does he get cast because he is a great actor,
Yeah.
who happens to be black?
Okay.
George Carlin did a really interesting routine once where he was talking about being openly gay.
Okay.
How you can be openly gay,
Openly gay.
but you can't be quote unquote openly black.
Okay.
Okay.
But when we say
because
openly gay, what do we mean? Because
it just means admitting it to the public.
Okay,
You know what I mean?
gotcha.
So the public knows you're gay.
Okay.
So with so he was talking about the difference between happens to be
Okay.
and openly.
Okay.
So Elton John now is openly gay.
He is.
In the past, he wasn't openly gay. He just happened to be gay.
Gay. Yes.
And a good example George gives about the race thing is he says you can't really be openly black. But then he goes on to talk about Louis Farrakhan.
Okay.
You know, history buffs, look it up. I'm not going to explain it to you. Okay? But Louis Farrakhan is openly black. Okay?
Why does he sort of?
Well, because he was Black Panthers, you know?
Okay.
Historically speaking, I said I wasn't going to explain it, but obviously my co-host needs a bit of education. The Black Panthers were this militant black organization.
Okay.
Kind of along the time frame of MLK Jr. And Malcolm X.
Okay.
And it
Civil
was,
rights.
we're black, black power, you know, kill whitey, that sort of stuff.
What was it? The African American Civil Rights Movement, almost
Yeah,
around that time. 1954.
But Farrakhan
1956.
is a bit later, and he's, like I said, very militant. So he's openly black.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? The sort of guy that would use the N-word just to get attention.
Just to get attention.
Whereas Colin Powell,
Okay.
who you may or may not know was quite influential in the United States government,
Okay.
is a black guy. But George goes on to say, well, he's openly black. He's not openly black, but he's this guy. He acts white. He dresses like a white guy. He uses white guy speech. He just happens to be black.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I suppose the not friendly term would be Uncle Tom,
Okay.
historically. So a black guy that, you know, dresses white,
Yeah.
talks white.
Yeah. Well, I like how you say, you know, sort of, you know, talk a black guy, you know, sort of talking white or dressing white. You know, would you say that a black person, you know, talking or acting white, you know, behave the way he does because he's educated? Are you sort of saying that, you know, we are characterized by color rather than character? You know, if that sort of makes sense, because it's interesting that you say, you know, a black person can act white.
I think
You know,
it's-
but what sort of makes you say that?
I think it's that the perception.
The perception. There we go.
Schreckner.
Okay.
Richard Schreckner. Again, look it up, people who don't know. But they talk about how life is performance.
Yeah.
So everything we do, you know, just you and me sitting here, I'm performing to you, you're performing to me, even at a subconscious level. So when we talk about dressing white or talking white or stuff like that, I see it as somebody who's grown up, say, in a what is nowadays termed urban environment.
Okay.
You know, urban music, urban clothing, etc. I'm doing air quotes for those people that don't get it. Generally, urban now means black.
Black. Yeah.
You know, we used to have black music. You know, we used to have black fashion, but now, to not be seen as racist,
Okay.
we've retermed it urban, which goes into the whole revisionist history stuff we were hopefully going to talk about later, how we change stuff to suit people's moods. But what I'm talking about is somebody who grew up in the ghetto, who in theory is proud of where they grew up, and the people they hung out with and stuff like that, but who decides to dress as if they're from, you know, a more upper crust upbringing.
Upper class upbringing, yes. I know what you
Bill
mean.
Cosby.
Bill Cosby.
Let's talk Bill Cosby.
Okay.
Bill Cosby talks white.
He talks white.
You know what I mean?
And he's very educated.
Yeah, well, but
Very
that's fine.
highly.
But being educated doesn't mean the same thing.
Okay.
I think it's being true to yourself that matters.
Okay. Why isn't he true to himself?
Well, no, he's an example of if you have a person with not his education,
Okay.
but they're dressing like him
Yes.
and talking like him.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I mean.
Yeah.
It's kind of like me coming from the hick background I come from.
Okay.
Deciding all of a sudden to wear, and being 42, deciding to wear my trousers down near my thighs and wearing my baseball cap sideways. That's not me.
That's not you at all.
Obviously,
Yeah.
I'm dressing that way to impress a certain audience.
Exactly.
Or attempt to.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're going with this whole, Spider-Man being black thing, or in the comic books,
Okay.
Thor.
Believe you
gender
me,
thing.
though. Believe you me, I have seen, a white man of your age, with trousers down to their buttons and wearing their cap sideways. What would you say is wrong with them? Is that because they were sort of brought up in these?
Well, first of all, I don't care who you are. Pull
okay.
your fucking trousers up.
Exactly.
Pull your trousers up.
Pull 'em.
And baseball caps on crooked,
Okay.
there's a reason it has a brim. Okay? The brim is to A, protect your eyes from the
Gotcha.
sun,
Sunlight.
or protect the back of your neck if you happen to be, a baseball catcher.
All right.
Okay? So when you wear it crooked, you're totally denying the functionality of your outfit, and you're only wearing it as a fashion statement.
It is. It is a fashion statement.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's kind of like the difference between once upon a time, everybody, the quote unquote young people nowadays go on about their Converse, and Converse is quite expensive.
They're expensive.
In the
Vans,
old
Converse.
days, when I was back in my day, I'll have you know, Converse were the poor people's shoes.
Yeah.
Converse is what I wore because I couldn't afford Adidas.
Really?
Yeah.
The people in the streets
Whereas
wore
nowadays,
Converse.
yeah, but nowadays it's the other way around.
I thought Converse was sort of a fashion wear for skateboarders.
Converse was poor people's shoes.
Poor people's shoes. Wow,
Yeah.
they've gone a long way.
Yeah.
They've gone a very long way.
It's all about branding, unfortunately,
Branding,
nowadays.
yes, marketing.
Again, this
Nice.
is that whole thing with the Spider-Man thing.
Okay. Spider-Man.
Because like you were saying, is the audience gonna, not go? It doesn't matter how good of an actor he is. Are enough of the audience not going to bother?
Yeah. Makes
I
a
would
huge
hope it's not the
difference.
case, but that does seem to be, kind of where we're going with that.
Okay.
But an example, strictly from the comic books at the moment, is there's a big debate about the Captain America character in the comics and the Thor character in the comics. And the debate is, lots of people are mad because quote unquote, all of a sudden, Captain America is black. Okay, these are people that have only seen the covers. They haven't read the storyline. And they don't understand that given the storyline, the most logical situation is for the character of Falcon from the movies.
Falcon.
Okay, he's been in the comics a lot longer than he's been in the movies, but that character becomes Captain America because Steve Rogers is no longer able to do it.
Gotcha.
The internet blows up. They've made Captain America a black man. Blah. Hate. Without,
hate.
Without reading the story.
Yes. Yeah.
And the same thing with the Thor situation at the moment. This big rigmarole went up. They've made Thor into a woman. They're changing Thor's gender. This, that, and the other. Again, these people haven't read the storyline.
I haven't read it.
They don't realize that Thor is not a woman. A woman has been deemed worthy by Mjolnir to wield the power of Thor. Two totally separate things. But we, as an aggressive monkey sort of nation, with that little bit of our brain on or off, we don't look into the story.
No, we don't look into
We
the
just
story.
react.
We just react straight away because we're not getting what we want.
Or what we think we want. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're sort of very pessimistic about change. We don't know how to deal with it, especially when it's very sensitive changes, around race, around gender, We don't know how to deal with that because of how society, rolls. We roll as a society where men are always in charge and men are always sort of pushing, other genders down, like the weaker gender. And that's not the right way to go about it, But, until society decides to be acceptant of change, I think that's how the world will become a better place.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, I mentioned revisionist history earlier. And obviously in comic books and in movies, they call it retconning. And that's where you rewrite somebody's history. in order to make them better fit your story.
Okay.
Okay? So, like, back in the 90s, sometimes, I don't remember when, they actually did a Captain America story called Red, White, and Black, which plays on the Tuskegee Airmen experiments. And it turns out that the first Captain America was actually black, because the U.S. government, being the U.S. government, chose to test the super soldier serum on a whole bunch of black guys who couldn't say no.
They couldn't say no.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but obviously that won't get mentioned anywhere in the Marvel movie universe.
Not yet.
But it's an example of retconning where we change things, or if it had really happened, why hadn't they mentioned it yet? Because it's an embarrassing secret, right?
It is.
I mean, do you get the feeling, moving into the real world a bit, that the media and the government kind of retcon our own history in the real world? For instance, I think that's the case, because you look at the education system in this country. I mean, you're quite a bit younger than me.
Okay.
How much did they teach you about World War II when you were in school?
Okay, well, to begin with, I studied most of my subjects in French, because I was born in Belgium, and obviously they did teach me a lot about World War II and most of World War One. What it was caused by, and
I mean, did the with your education, the concentration camps now?
the Jews and the Germans.
Well, yeah, exactly. The first word you use is Jews.
Okay.
Right? But did they tell you about the Catholics that were killed in the concentration camps?
The Catholics?
Yes. Did they tell you about the homosexuals that were killed? Or the intellectuals that were killed in the concentration camps that weren't Jewish?
They weren't Jewish, but they were against what the Nazis were doing.
They still ended up in the concentration camps.
Exactly, yes.
So did they teach you about those as well? Or was the majority of your education about the Jewish issue?
It was mainly on the Jews and how they were slaughtered and killed and burned, to ashes. They had nothing. No, they didn't explain sort of about the people who were German, pure Germans, for instance. They had nothing to explain about that. And that's what happens when good tries to fight against evil. Regardless of who you are. The Germans would defend the evil they were doing at all costs, even if you were German, If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and it illustrates my point.
Okay.
Even though you grew up in France, which is a country with a much more in-depth history, with the whole Vichy situation and stuff like that, you weren't taught really about anybody except for the Jews. Just like nowadays, whenever anybody talks about 9/11, you say the words 9/11, most of the people know what you mean, but the one and only thing most people think of is about the Twin Tower situation. Right? So we totally ignore the people that died at the Pentagon. Okay? We seem to totally ignore United 93 because the Twin Towers is the quote-unquote better story for that situation. And my fear is that a lot more of that is happening nowadays, with the news only reporting what is quote-unquote newsworthy. I mean, we hear all kinds of stuff about, like, a single murder somewhere than we do about the bigger issues that are affecting our lives.
Yeah.
And how much of that is down to the need for the news to be sensationalist enough to get ratings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think there are a lot of really good journalists out there. But why aren't they getting their stories across?
I think it's mainly due to the news not trying to scare away society, Society panic very easily, I mean, did you see what happened when they were sort of broadcasting what happened about... when there was a soldier, who was killed, by sort of Muslims in London a while back, and how, sort of
the
society...
Lee Rigsby thing.
That's the Lee Rigsby, and people were sort of panicking about, things like that when they should be maybe sort of questioning the media about why You want, giving off more news as those?
And why does the news feel that it has to report things in a certain way?
In a certain
I
way.
mean, you read stuff like the newspapers in this country. You have the obviously lefty newspapers.
Okay, yeah, left
And
wing,
you have the obviously righty newspapers.
left wing.
And I reckon that you and I, if we wrote a press release, could give it to both of these people
Okay.
and come up with two totally different news stories.
Okay.
Because one of them will write it from a purely leftist
Exactly.
point of view. And the other one will write it from a purely righty point of view, despite the words we've given them being the words we've given them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like the difference between let's assume that a rich guy jumps off a building.
Okay.
Right? So one newspaper will be like, so and so jumps to his death. And another newspaper will say, so and so driven to suicide. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So one is his
Language.
choice. One is, oh, somebody did something horrible to him.
Exactly.
9 times out of 10 it will be whoever the enemy of that newspaper is.
It's just how they use language, isn't it? Language is a very scary a tool to sort of hypnotize the audience. It's just all about language. Certain words used can make a subject seem much more trivial than it really is. And that's how the newspapers, that's how the news hypnotize their society. They have to be really careful.
Exactly. Right.
Words make a difference.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to have to do this to you, but our producer is waving his hand, something about time, and we're running out of time. So we're going to have to say goodbye for now. G and I would both really appreciate, if you want to hear more from the G-Men, just send us a tweet to either of our Twitters.
That's fine.
Mine is at Estes Mobile.
Okay, mine is gman@hotmail.com. No problem, you can find that.
That's not your Twitter, that's your email account.
My bad. I'm just.
Do you want to tell them your Twitter?
I haven't got a Twitter, guys. So if you wanna send me an email, it's at eman. So EMMAN _DA1 @hotmail.live.uk.
Right. So follow me on Twitter, email G-Man here, and hopefully you'll like us enough that you want us back, and we'll give you. You can even suggest topics. Matter of fact, early days yet. Please suggest some topics that me and G-Man here can talk about. Make sure to check out the New College Nottingham HE Festival, June 1st through 5th.